please.
Item number 3, number 5757.
Chairman Craven, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill comes to us from Representative Roberts. What it does is that it increases the penalties for first-degree and second-degree sexual assault. Specifically, it provides that the mandatory minimum for first-degree sexual assault would be 15 years, of which the first 10 years would be served and not be subject to deferment or suspension. And with reference to second-degree sexual assault, it shall be increased from 3 to 5 years, and that the first 5 years would also not be subject to suspension or deferment. This bill comes to us, I'm not going to get into the personal story of it. It comes to us from Representative Roberts, who I'll say for the purposes of this debate had a horrific experience in life, of which I hope none of us ever even have a relative that experiences it. I actually participated and had an opportunity to see her give her comments at the sentencing of a relative of hers that was accused of who ultimately pled to a second-degree sexual assault. And it not only was one of the more eloquent and moving opportunities I had to see somebody speak in my 40-year career, but Judge Thunberg came down off the bench and asked her to stay for a moment and said that she's been a judge and a practitioner for probably close to 50 years. She said she had never seen anything of that nature and that was that impressive in her entire career. This is something that has been supported by the organization that advocates on behalf of victims of sexual assault, Peg Langhammer, who is the executive director of Day One. And I'll read the last sentence that she said in her letter advocating for the passage of this bill. This legislation, if enacted, will result in more offenders being held accountable and facing higher penalty for these horrific crimes. Day One strongly supports passing the legislation in Rhode Island and increasing the minimum sentences for both first and second-degree sexual assault. It also is a crime for which post-sentencing has its own form of judicial proceedings. What do I mean by that? Usually at the end of a criminal case, there's a sentence, and the sentence is passed. And the only judicial proceeding thereafter might be a post-conviction relief or something of that nature, or an appeal. In this instance, there's sex offender registration court, and there's a calendar in the Superior Court that handles sex offender registration. And they designate the degree of danger that a person poses based on the nature of the crime, the nature of the individual, past criminal record, and many other factors. I say that because even us creating that, and when I say us, the legislature, and the court administering that, has recognized that the nature of a defendant in a first or second degree sexual assault or child molestation of either first and second degree is uniquely dangerous. And in that context, I don't think that this change in the law offends the idea of someone taking the wrong direction as far as trying to bring rehabilitation to play in trying to turn people's lives around. This doesn't affect any other type of crime other than this first and second degree, and the dangerousness of the individuals that commit this crime has been recognized by the court and by the legislature in passing the codification of sex registration and having these different levels that someone has to abide by. I really think it was a courageous act on her part to submit this bill. I wholeheartedly believe that this is a great bill, and I move passage.
Chairman Craven moves passage, seconded by Leader Blazajewski. And why don't we just open up the lights, please, as many seconds. All those seconding the bill, please hit the green button. Bill's been moved. Clerk, there are 29 seconds. Please lock the machine. The bill's been moved and seconded. On the bill, there were several lights. I'm going to go first to Representative Roberts, please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Okay, so why don't we get the amendment in play, and then I'll come back to you. So this would be the appropriate time if you have a floor amendment.
I do.
Please proceed.
It is LC 000710/2. And what it does, and I won't say all that it does, but what it does is it inserts in the appropriate sections of the bill for changing the penalty for first-degree sexual assault and second-degree sexual assault, that the bill will be known as Sherry's Law.
Thank you. Wait, just a minute, please. Just a minute. I know. Just a minute. I want to just get the amendment in play. Chairman Craven moves LC 00710/2, seconded by Leader Blazajewski, Representative Lima, Representative Chairman Corvese, Chairman Bennett, and Chairman Casey, and Chairwoman Serpa, and Representative Caldwell, all seconding the amendment, as well as Leader Chippendale. I'm getting around to this side of the room. Leader Chippendale, Representative Quattrochi, Representative Fenton Fung, Representative Nardone, Representative Rhea, and Representative Casimiro, all Whip Ackerman seconding the amendment. On the amendment only, there are, clear the board, please. Does anybody have any lights on the amendment? On the amendment. On the amendment. Representative Sanchez, please. No, on the bill. Representative Knight, on the amendment or the bill?
Am I on? On both, Mr. Speaker.
Well, now would be the appropriate time for the amendment.
Out of an abundance of caution, I am recusing myself from the vote on this amendment, and if you'll permit me, from the vote on the main bill.
Please so ordered, and please, I know you...
I've already done the paperwork.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, there are no lights. Clerk, please unlock the machine. All those in favor of the amendment, please vote green. Any opposing the amendment? There are 69 votes in favor. Clerk, lock the machine. 69 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative. The act as amended. Now we are on the amended act. There were several lights. Now would be the appropriate time to put your lights on. I will recognize Representative Roberts first, please.
Thank you, Speaker. If I may just say a few things. I think that there are some things that the body needs to know, and I also have some thank yous that I think are in order. And if you could please bear with me, I don't want to forget anything, so I am going by my bullet-pointed list. So firstly, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker, because you have been so understanding and kind to bring this to the floor for me, and I just appreciate it so much. I'm deeply, deeply grateful. I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
So I have a special thank you for Chairman Bob Craven, because he's worked so hard to help get this bill to the floor. He always said, Sherry, this situation, it transcends politics. Bob, you've helped me so much more than you even realize, and I'm eternally grateful to you. Leader Chippendale, your steady, unwavering, emotional and professional support, along with that of our Chief of Staff, Sue Stenhouse, and our entire caucus, whose support has helped me to stand strong through this very trying time. Thank you. As for the rest of this body, including some on the Speaker's staff, do not ever underestimate the impact that your kindness and support can have on a person, because it has been a very moving experience for me. Chairman Craven's words that, Sherry, this kind of situation transcends politics, That rang true for me when I witnessed some people on this very floor who sit on the exact opposite side of the political spectrum approach me with such understanding and kindness that it has moved me to the very core. People like Reps Justine Caldwell, June Speakman, Whip Kazarian. I don't say this lightly. For anyone that I failed to mention, it was not my intention, because there are many of you. For every single one of you, thank you. Thank you for sharing that human side of yourself with me. I had things to learn too, and I appreciate that. On the bill itself, I stand before you as someone who has personally experienced major flaws in our justice system. This law has gaping holes that need to be closed. To be clear, though, this isn't about me. I stand to gain absolutely nothing. It's too late for me. My case is closed. I am hopeful, though, that my experience can help you to understand the why and the how towards the other victims that we have a responsibility to help. To sum up my experience as a victim, and a child one at that, I went through sheer hell. This was not a mere allegation of touching. It was a proven long-term violent abuse, and my abuser admitted to it. Yet the offender initially charged with first-degree sex assault easily got his charge reduced and escaped jail time. 0 consequences. This isn't a minor infraction. I'm not asking for the death penalty. I'm asking for the punishment of the type of criminal that cannot be rehabilitated and is an ongoing threat to society. The idea that some believe that violent sex offenders do not deserve a minimum sentence after committing a crime of that magnitude is incomprehensible. Their victims never had an option. The victims are left with a life sentence of irreparable consequences. I can't even tell you how far those tentacles reach. Victims, they cannot reduce that life sentence.
1 minute.
This bill has been fully vetted by legal counsel from both sides with bipartisan support of the majority. In conclusion, and I know many of you will agree, women, we've had to fight very hard for justice and equality. These are not mere words, they're a reality. I stand here before you as living proof. That said, I'm deeply, deeply grateful to all of you who are pushing politics aside to do the right thing in support of this important women's issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Dawson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I reluctantly rise today in opposition to this bill. And as I said at the judiciary hearing, I recognize that this bill comes from a very good place. And I echo Chairman Craven's statements regarding Representative Roberts and the courageousness that she's shown not only in putting this bill forward, but having the courage to go into court and represent herself in a very difficult prosecution, which these cases always are. But as some of you know, I have a great deal of experience in these matters. I was 20 years at the Attorney General's office, including 6 years as the deputy chief of the criminal division, and now I think I'm in my 12th or 13th year as a criminal defense attorney, and at one point I was president of the Defense Attorneys Association. My reason for rising is really because although there are situations where this type of legislation could serve some good, there are many cases where it's going to really, really cripple the criminal justice system. Folks, all justice is individual. Every case rises and falls on its own merits. That's why we don't have computers acting as judges who we stick in the charges in the person and let the computer tell us what's going to happen. I've had occasion to do training in third world countries. I've been to Mexico. That's what happens. The prosecution writes a memo, gives it to a judge, and they sentence the fellow without any regard to any consideration to any consequences. This country had, over the last few years, after many years of really making an error in imposing mandatory minimum sentences and a host of different charges, mostly drugs, but is now slowly making its way back away from that, for that very reason, that every justice is individual, and we can't have broad-based penalties for different things. In the case of a first-degree sexual assault, having handled hundreds of them, I can tell you, and as we all get up here and occasionally talk, and we all can do it, some people can't get through it. Some people can't go to court. Some people can't testify. I had a case once with a teenage girl. Her hair's falling out. She's lost all sorts of weight. She can't sleep. She can't eat because she's so nervous about having to testify. Because the sad truth of these cases is, and as I say, nobody's advocating on behalf of rapists and sexual assailants. I'm advocating on behalf of victims who are going to be unwilling to come forward in a case where there's a mandatory minimum sentence. As you know, as you should know, almost every advocacy group, the studies they show, 75% of cases are done by someone you know. In all my hundreds and hundreds of cases, I can count the cases where a stranger attacked somebody on one hand. I can't really remember any. An uncle, a family friend, a babysitter, a teacher, hundreds of them. And it's very difficult for victims to come forward and have to testify and stand up in front of everybody. It's an ordeal. It's extremely difficult. This legislation will have, when we first came in here as freshmen, the speaker talked about unintended consequences. I can tell you what the unintended consequences are. People will not come forward. And as Chairman Craven points out, even if somebody goes for less than jail, they become registered sex offenders. Everyone knows who they are. They have to register with the police. So there are many, many consequences for those rare circumstances where you have to let somebody go for less than jail or plead a case down to something else. It happens all the time. That being said, I just don't see a problem here. Folks are sentenced to jail for massive amounts of prison time in these cases on a regular basis. One minute. The last case I was involved in, the fellow got more than 2.5 centuries in jail. It happens all the time. The prison is chock full of sexual offenders. I strongly feel that this legislation has two main, real huge problems. The mandatory jail, and secondly, and probably most importantly, the proposal for second-degree sexual assault, 5 years to serve, frankly, is unconscionable. No one's saying that people that commit sexual assault in the second degree should go stock-free, or that it's not a serious crime, or it doesn't affect the victims. But 5 years, sexual assault in the second degree could be just touching someone's backside in a bar room or something of this nature. And I don't mean to excuse any of that behavior. It certainly involves punishment and being a registered sex offender, but you could stab somebody and get less than 5 years to serve. 5 years in jail is a long, long time. And sometimes people get a lot more than jail than that because they're deviants. But other times, it's just not appropriate. Folks, the unintended consequences of this bill, I cannot overstate. It comes from a good place. I commend Representative Roberts, but I'm going to be voting no on this matter.
Thank you. Representative Sanchez, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important that I make a few comments on why I will be voting no on this bill, but I would like to begin with stating and saying thank you to Representative Roberts for sharing her story, and just want to echo the sentiment that, you know, my solidarity, my support around her work, and I'm sorry for everything that you've gone through, and you know that I have a lot of respect for you and our Republican colleagues. But I also want to make clear that this is not me opposing the fact that we need to give more leniency to rapists or to molesters, et cetera. None of that. You know, rape is rape. I have sisters. I'll have a mother. I have grandmothers. I have a mom. I am for more power to a woman, more involvement of women in positions of power, more leadership. I've been in support of the ACA bill when some of the folks who are voting here in favor of this bill were voting against that bill. I'm here for marriage equality. I'm here for reproductive rights. I'm here for LGBTQ plus non-binary rights as well. And so, you know, there's this hypocrisy that exists between those policies and the ones that we're debating on today. And so I just want to make that clear. My big issue with this bill is, on top of the points Representative Dawson had made, this also fuels fire to the mass incarceration prison population as well. This targets poor working class people. I'm not saying just Black and Latino people, but also every working community across the state. This is just adding more fuel to that fire. And that's where the bigger picture is for me around this bill, because we're just giving more and more, we're criminalizing people who may not have been committing a crime, you know, and that's what I just want to make clear. But again, with all due respect, I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Lima, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in strong support of this legislation. And before I begin, I want to commend Representative Sherry Roberts for coming forward with her story. Sheer hell, as she said. And it takes a lot of courage to come forward publicly and share a story like that, a story of sheer hell that she went through in her lifetime. And I think we should afford Representative Roberts the same consideration we've afforded when Representative McAtee came forward with the church with the problem with her family. And she should be afforded the same consideration as we afforded in that case. Many people who've been sexually assaulted or molested do not come forward. A large number, and for many reasons. They're afraid, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed, they believe the police will not do anything. They believe nothing will happen in court, because a lot of these people walk away with no jail time. How can we stand here and say somebody who sexually molests a child for years should be able to walk free and continue that behavior? No, they should be locked up. Mandatory sentence. Go to jail. These people cannot be cured. There's no rehabilitation for them. If we don't lock them in jail, what is going to happen? They're going to be out there committing the same crime over and over again with more victims. Your child, your sister, your mother, your grandmother, your neighbor. It's going to go on and on. When do we put our foot down and protect the people who elected us to come up here and say, no, you are not going to commit these crimes, and walk away, as Representative Roberts, perpetrator, who admitted it, walked away with no jail time? You go through a traumatic experience, people are walking away, people are afraid of coming forward. Society's getting the brunt of this. People become afraid. Let us show support to our constituency that if you're a victim of this horrendous crime, we stand behind you and we believe these people belong in jail. Again, I commend Representative Sherry Roberts. She has shown a lot of courage to come forward. And I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Stewart, please.
Thank you, Leader. I rise in opposition to this bill, and before I explain why, I'd like to begin my remarks by stating unequivocally that every Rhode Islander should be safe from sexual assault and abuse, and we across the board must do a better job of preventing sexual assault and supporting victims of such assault. But like some of my colleagues who've risen in opposition to this bill, I don't believe that increasing mandatory minimums will accomplish either of those things. And instead, this bill moves Rhode Island in the wrong direction, away from the criminal justice reform that we've begun. And if you've read the statement of opposition to this bill by the ACLU, you'd see that the American Bar Association opposes mandatory minimums, and they've done that for many decades, and that former Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy spoke out against them. And in explaining his opposition, he said the following: the policy, speaking of mandatory minimums, nonetheless gives the decision to an assistant prosecutor not trained in the exercise of discretion and takes discretion from the trial judge. The trial judge is the one actor in the system most experienced with exercising discretion in a transparent, open, and reasoned way. So for that reason, and what will be the likely unintended consequences that will come from this bill, along with the lack of a prison impact statement provided with the bill, and that it, if passed, will make Rhode Island more punitive in this area than Texas. I will be voting no on this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Batista, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise today to make two brief points. And before making those points, I want to express my sincere appreciation and respect, not only for Representative Roberts, who I've had a chance to know, the Judiciary Committee, but for everybody who spoke during that hearing and for everybody who will support this legislation today. I will not be one of the representatives supporting this legislation today, and just want to share two quick reasons why. First of all, as a brief clarification, there were some comments, questions, or testimony made during the Judiciary Committee hearing that suggested to me that perhaps we don't all have a grip on what mandatory minimums mean. On the one hand, these crimes do carry a certain amount of time that they must be, people found guilty must be punished for. Minimum 3 years, minimum 5 years, minimum 10 years. However, when we talk about mandatory minimums, we're talking about jail. We're not talking about a criminal sentence. We're not talking about probation or a filing or suspended sentence. We're talking about jail. So it is significantly different to go from a position where somebody has to receive a minimum of 3 years probation, for example, to 5 years mandatory jail. As someone who's been an attorney for the last 8 years and dedicated myself almost entirely to the practice in defense of poor communities, immigrant communities, Our system is far from perfect. And while all of the people who participate in our systems, the judges, the prosecutors, the sheriffs, are all decent men and women, sometimes the devil is hidden in the details. And bills and statutes like this one produce mass injustice. For example, in my very lifetime, think about the Central Park 5 in New York City. There are some crimes, especially those of the nature that are as delicate as this one, that demand a response. And sometimes our system gets ahead of itself in finding who to point a finger at. And so if there were a way to add a line to this legislation that said only those people who are completely guilty of committing these crimes would serve these sentences, I could support it. But as someone who has lived day in and day out, not only as an attorney who represents people of color in poor communities, but as someone who is a person of color who's born and raised and continues to live in a poor community, our system is far too imperfect to entrust it with the ability to send people to jail for a mandatory minimum amount of time without thinking about it very seriously. And so, as I said, I'll end how I began. I respect and appreciate anybody who advocates on an issue as important as this one. However, we as legislators who make important decisions, not just about millions and billions of dollars, but about people's lives, for us to exercise the power of the state to decide who should and who should not go to jail for these periods of time requires extraordinary consideration. And I trust that all of you will apply that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Newberry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My first day of law school, my first class of criminal law, the first topic was a question, the philosophical question of why do we punish people? And some of the theories were we punish people for deterrence, to deter repeat criminality. We punish them just to punish them because they've done bad things, sort of the wrath of God type of attitude. And we also punish them to protect society. We take them out of circulation. And if you think about it, the question of why do we, any society, any human society, punish anybody goes back to the dawn of time. And someone in any society, and we are that someone, has to make those decisions. Every criminal statute we pass that criminalizes conduct is a policy choice that we make, and every sentence or guideline or anything we put in those statutes is a policy choice we make. And there's no black and white answers here. There's no real right or wrong answers on any of this. Back in the 1970s, because of a perception that the federal court system was being too lenient with criminals and letting people go free for heinous crimes and so forth, Congress decided to react and created the mandatory federal sentencing guidelines. It's like a pendulum. Maybe it went too far one way in the 70s, and in the 80s, along comes the sentencing guidelines. And I also remember when I was in law school, I was lucky to have an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia, and one of the things we did was study those guidelines, and they were still relatively recent. It was the mid-90s. And I remember finding them sort of ridiculous. You know, if you got this factor, you had to serve an extra 2 months, or this factor, you were less 2 months, this or that. And they applied to all crimes across the board. And they were so restrictive, the judiciary hated it. And the policy choices that people started to realize that it was going too far the other way. There's been talk about mass incarceration. That's a problem. I've stood on this floor many times and supported criminal justice reform bills. I believe far too many people are in jail in this state and in this country, particularly for nonviolent crimes like drug possession. But there's no black and white, as I said, no right or wrong answers here. So we need to decide on this particular issue, what do we want to do? We already have decided as a body, not us this year, but in the existing statute, we already put in mandatory minimums for first and second degree sexual assault. They're in the law. The problem is, and this is the problem that led to this bill, there's other sections of the law that allow the judiciary to suspend or defer those sentences. What this bill really does, I don't care about the 3 to 5 year difference. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, that's fine. Appreciate that. The real issue is we don't want to allow judges to suspend the sentences of first and second degree convicted sex offenders. And you know what? In the category of criminality, you got murderers, child molesters, pedophiles, and sex offenders. I'm not really sure what else is worse than that. I put them all in the top category. So as someone who has said repeatedly that I believe in judicial discretion, I do, but not for every single thing. This is an issue which we should punish people for. And if one case every 2 years has a judge go off the rails and do something that the rest of society thinks is bad, and passing this statute will prevent that from happening and lock up somebody who does not belong on the streets, I'm in favor of that. And remember, this doesn't apply to third-degree sexual assault. So when it comes to plea bargains, if you've got a borderline case, the prosecutor can still plead this down to third degree without the mandatory minimum sentence. The reality is, as a practical matter, this is only going to apply to cases where someone challenges it and gets convicted by a jury in court, and I don't have any sympathy for those people whatsoever.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Felix, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, colleagues. As many of my other colleagues have stood, I also want to commend Representative Roberts for, I have tremendous respect and compassion and admiration for being able to stand up and tell your story and being able to publicly share that traumatic experience. However, like many of my colleagues, I too stand in opposition to this legislation, and a lot of what I wanted to say and had prepared has been said in terms of the way in which our country, our state, has been moving away from sentencing mandatory minimums towards more reform. Research has shown how mandatory minimums are not good for public safety and are not good for our communities. They have shown how they actually increase violence rather than deter it. So yet we're sitting here about increasing or adding mandatory minimums towards another offense, knowing very well that they don't work. I am all for holding folks accountable. As they say, you did the crime, you do the time. I'm okay if we grab this bill and we add in terms of increasing the sentence. I'm 100% for it, because they should be held accountable. But to then say, let's remove that discretion, let's impose this amount of jail time, as Rep. Batista has already mentioned, it's contrary to everything I believe. I can't stand here and hypocritically say I'm against mandatory minimums for some offenses but not others, right? I can't. Why? Because that's not how my compass works. I can't do that. And though I am very empathetic to those who have been victims of this crime, and I am very empathetic and understand the need in terms of holding folks accountable, I just don't believe that this is the right way. There are many bills that we have passed to protect victims of sexual assault and other types of assault, and this is not one of them. This is not one of them. So I really urge my colleagues, with the utmost respect for Rep. Roberts and understanding that there are many folks, many in this room, many who are listening, who have gone through very traumatic experiences and who deserve justice. I'm not minimizing that. And neither am I saying that they should get away with what they did. Not in the least bit. What I am saying is that mandatory minimums are ineffective, are not good for public safety, and are not good in terms of holding folks accountable. So why do it in the first place? In my opinion, this bill needs to be amended. Remove the mandatory minimums, leave the piece in terms of increasing the offenses, and I'm on board. I will vote for the bill, but I can't vote for the bill when it has these consequences, and I really urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Fenton Fung, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect to my fellow colleague here, Rep. Felix, if you don't want the consequences, then don't do the violent crime. This is not a non-violent crime. With all the areas of criminal justice that I think so many people in this room have rightly pushed and done a really great job of saying non-violent offenders, really, we should keep them out of the prison system and work towards more reform, that's great. I agree with you. This is first-degree sexual assault. This is someone coming into your room, breaking into your house, and raping you. This is violent. This is not somebody who should be sitting next to you in the restaurant. And that's it. I'm sorry, I've heard so many eloquent statements about how this might be unfair to the person who rapes the woman. I'm just not, as Rep. Newberry said, all that sympathetic to them at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Agello, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, first, I had told Representative Roberts, at the beginning of the committee hearing that I wasn't going to speak in committee, and then I did. And for that, I'm sorry, Sherry. And I am sorry to be posing you in something that clearly means so much to you and comes from a horribly painful experience in your own life. I'm really pained, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, to be in the position of standing and opposing this legislation. But I have to, because it is going against what we've been trying to do, the whole country is trying to do, which is reducing mandatory minimums, reducing our incarceration rates, and allowing judges to make the appropriate decisions. Do judges sometimes err on the side of leniency? I'm certain that they do. And I'm certain that all the other judges sometimes probably err in what I was thinking, and maybe most of us would be thinking, err in being too strict with someone who has been convicted. But I don't think that mandatory minimums are the way to go. I think that we should leave these decisions up to the judges. And again, I am sorry to be speaking against something that means so much to one of our colleagues.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Caldwell, please.
Thank you, Speaker. I wanted to get up and address the body because I don't think I'm somebody who's thought of as a legislator who's very tough on crime. I definitely believe less things should be felonies. I believe we should put less people in jail. And on judiciary, we talk constantly about mandatory minimums. Sometimes we do alter our bills to get an agreement about mandatory minimums. Sometimes we do not. And I think in this instance, you know, we have decided that some crimes are so horrible, right, that people should go to jail. They should be felonies. People should go to jail. They maybe cannot be rehabilitated. They need to be punished, and they're a threat to society. They're a threat to their victims, and they're a threat to every other child or woman or whoever else comes in their path. And that's one of the reasons that I am supporting this bill, that I think this crime that we're talking about, first and second degree sexual assault, you have to be convicted of these crimes. This is not you are, you know, somebody alleges that you do this. You have to go before a jury of your peers with a rigorous and excited defense by some of our very talented colleagues, right? And you have to be convicted by a jury of your peers of these crimes. And then you have to go suffer the consequences. And that is one of the reasons that I am supporting this. I have to agree with Representative Fenton Fung that there's a way to avoid this, and it's keep your hands to yourself. And then you're not going to find yourself in this situation. But this situation is a very tall order. This doesn't happen every day. As Representative Roberts pointed out in her testimony in committee, you know, it is very hard to do this, to go and get a conviction that might be old, where there's not a lot of evidence or where it's hard to come forward. And I think, you know, to paint a broad spectrum about the mandatory minimums in the case of, you know, raping your stepdaughter who's a child and, like, you know, having some drugs on you, those are two very different things, right? One of them is a real societal ill, which is violence against children and women. And another one is a war on drugs that we're trying to walk back. Those are two different things when we're talking about mandatory minimums, and we talk about that a lot in our committee, and when we want to impose those minimums and when we don't. So I would just really implore you all to think about that, implore yourselves to put yourselves in the position where you've suffered a first or second degree sexual assault, which with all due respect is not a slap, you know, on the bottom and somebody's going to jail for 5 years. And I would urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Chairman Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I worked a long time in a psychiatric hospital. I very rarely got to work with the perpetrators. I got to work with the victims. The perpetrators in this bill would get 5 to 10 years. The victim gets life. There's triggers everywhere. Could be your cologne, could be a smell that brings back these feelings. It could be a sound. The mandatory sentence is light. I think they should go to jail longer. You know, it's a terrible thing to abuse someone repeatedly, violently, and try to, I get perpetrators that come into the hospital and they're trying to lessen their crime. They're trying to minimize what they did by their mental illness. Well, a lot of them don't have mental illness. The mental illness is that they're a pedophile or a rapist. We can't have this go lightly, you know, and when we listened to this testimony in judiciary, I was on the edge. And Chairman Craven said some very important things that got me thinking about the people I've worked with over the last, 50 years. It's a long time. But we got to think of the victim. It's the perpetrators that, I don't know what to say about the perpetrators. I can't get up here and say what I'd like to say. But, you know, the victim is what this is about. And I think they're getting off light with 5 to 10 years. I really do. I think we should give them a lot more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Phillips, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't going to even get up and rise and speak about this, but after hearing so many people, and there were some good points on both sides, but I'm in strong support of this bill for two major reasons. First of all, the perpetrator takes the dignity of the victim. And secondly, as Chairman Bennett just said, the victim has to live with what happened for the rest of their life. Yes, the perpetrator will go to prison sometimes, maybe get a suspended sentence. But what good does it do for the victim who still has to live this over and over and over again? I spoke to one woman, and there are sexual victims on both genders, but we be honest with ourselves, and most of them are women that are the victims. But I spoke to one woman years ago, and it just came to my mind with this bill coming up, is that she was honest about what happened to her, and she honestly said she was never able to have a very nice sex life because of what happened. All she could think of is that night, what happened to her. And so she went from relationship to relationship trying to find herself. So you got to consider that before you make the vote against this bill. And I hope everybody will seriously consider voting for it, as I will be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Leader Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. This bill has been around for a little bit this year, and there's been a lot of conversation that's happened around it. We could look at the original statute, and in fact we have, some of us have, and read that language, and we just don't have the intent of the legislators at the time. But it says very simply, every person shall serve no less than 3 years. And we use shall in this building all the time, shall and may. We know what they mean. I think it means it's mandatory. But there's another statute that allows judicial discretion where they can suspend or defer, okay? That's what this bill is seeking to fix. We heard some things that I think need to be addressed. First, the prison impact statement is very much in hand. It is in the Speaker's office, it's in my office, and it is available. And if I can give a layman's summary of what it says, it will make no impact. There'll be no cost. There'll be no burden on the ACI. There's your impact. We heard that a pat on the backside on a basketball court can end somebody in jail for 10 years. That's just not the case. The third degree part of the statute allows a lot of discretion. The prosecutors have discretion when they see the facts of the case and they understand the issue to charge appropriately. And that happens. We have absolutely made a concerted effort in this building as well as across the nation to address some of the criminal justice reforms that need to be done. And I have myself, as have most of the people in this room, supported them. But again, we're talking about things that make sense. We're talking about drug crimes. Yes, okay, we get that. We passed a bill some years ago banning the box. We can't hold people's convictions against them when they're applying for a job. I don't care what the conviction was for. If they did the crime, they did the time, then they should be able to get back to work and get back to their lives. We support those things. Those are the reforms we need. However, this isn't a drug crime. This isn't a victimless crime. As Rep. Newberry pointed out, save murder, this is the worst possible crime that can be committed on another person. Whether it's a woman or a little boy or a little girl or a man, it doesn't make a difference. It's a horrible crime, regardless of who that victim is. We heard that victims will be unwilling to come forward if there is a minimum mandatory. I would say, right now, victims are hesitant to come forward because it's a joke and they don't get justice. So how many people are out there who have not come forward because of this? How many will now? These are the things we have to think of. We heard about the Central Park Five, and absolutely, those very extremely rare situations have popped up throughout history. There's no question about that, but we can apply that to any crime, anything we legislate in this building. We can find extremely rare occasions to demonstrate a what if. We're not doing that here. We heard that this targets poor working class people. No, it targets rapists and molesters. It doesn't target anybody other than them. You have to go and be investigated by the law enforcement agency. It has to be investigated by the prosecutors, and then it has to go before a jury, and it has to be heard. And the elements of the crime, regardless of whether it's second or first, whatever the elements are, have to be proven. This is a person who has been convicted of raping or molesting. We heard mandatory minimums don't work. Don't work at what? If you're keeping a rapist off the street for 10 years, it's working to keep that rapist from raping someone for 10 years. It works. You don't need a study for that.
Less than a minute.
Thank you. We have had a lot of debate about this, and I think it just needs to be accepted that we have not done a good job on this. We've let victims down. We've disappointed families. We've destroyed lives by not having the proper protections in place. Again, these are convicted rapists. We heard that people don't even get this kind of time for being stabbed. I will confess on the record that I would much rather be stabbed than raped. And I'm not trying to make light of it. I want you to think of it that way. The kind of stabbing that gets you less time than this ain't that bad compared to being raped. Let's put this into the human context. Let's take off the lawyer hats, and let's do this as humans. Please do the right thing on this. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Chairwoman Vella Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to tell you, most of the things that I was going to say has already been covered by Leader Chippendale, and I can't often find myself in that situation, but I'm very proud that I do tonight. Representative Roberts, regardless of what happens with this bill, if the bill passes or if the bill fails, you have made a huge positive impact for the people of the state of Rhode Island just by your bravery in coming forward and expressing what occurred to you. And it's as my brothers and sisters have said, the shame, the feeling of degradation, and the questioning of self-worth. You've let people know that when you are a victim, you don't have to continue victimizing yourself by staying quiet. I've always been told that it was the role of lawmakers to put the safety and the protection of their constituents above all others. I'm very proud of the work that we've done with the justice reforms, but I think that we can do our work without feeling that we're contradicting our direction by taking a hard stance against hardened criminals. I mean, we're talking about not just that this is a violent crime, but that it tears at the soul of a person. I mean, what is it that we want to stand for? Do we want to stand for being fair to the perpetrators who are not driven to do this out of any need for food or shelter, but something is broken inside of them, and then they choose to break other people? These are the individuals that we want to argue on the behalf of. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure I'm going to hear somebody say point of order, but I have to say it. You don't want us to protect ourselves in our houses, and now you don't want to write a law that protects people in the streets in their houses. So what do we want to do? Again, let's change the state motto from hope to hopeless. We have the ability in our hands right now to make a strong move, not a political statement, but a strong move to protect people from predators. Who wouldn't want to protect a family member from a predator? I mean, we've spoken about your sisters and your brothers and your children. I don't know how else to make it more personal than what Representative Roberts has already done. Put yourself in the representative's shoes. And would you want to hear people arguing about how unfair it is to the poor criminal who has brutalized them? That doesn't even make any sense. I wish you to just search your own conscience, to search your own heart. And again, yes, please, put aside the law degree or any other degree that forces you to think in a purely academic manner. This is not academics. This is real life. Make the right choice, because the next victim of a violent crime could certainly be a person in your family. And what will you do? Will you go to them and say, don't worry, I did everything I could to make sure that we were fair and just to the person that raped you? I don't think so. Thank you.
1 minute, thank you. Chairwoman McEntee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a lot that I could say about this. I'm going to start with, I generally don't like mandatory sentencing. And I agree I understand where many of you are coming from. I know a lot about Sherry Roberts' case. I have extreme sympathy and empathy for her. I worked with her for several years on getting her to where she could have her case heard in court. My honest opinion about Sherry's abuser, her stepfather, he should have spent the rest of his life in prison. No doubt about it. I have a lot of faith in the judiciary, and I believe that they use their discretion very wisely in most cases. I know that Bob and you were there at the pretrial, I believe is the sentencing, pretrial and sentencing. Why anybody wouldn't have pushed to send this man to prison is beyond me. That's all I can say, Sherry. I thought he should have gone to prison. I think he should still be in prison. What happened to you should happen to no one. And I'm very familiar, as Charlene pointed out, obviously, I've experienced it with my own family, through my sister. So I did struggle with the idea of which way to go on this bill, but I am saying to you today, I will be voting in favor. And again, Sherry's abuser should spend the rest of his life in jail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Chairwoman Serpa, please.
Thank you, Speaker. I will be less than a minute because I think all of the points that need to be made have been made. One thing I'm going to refute, and really I would like someone to show me that this kind of a crime is allegedly committed by people of race, people of low socioeconomic from society because I'm just not seeing that. But Leader Chippendale and I think Representative Ella Wilkinson, they said it so clearly. This is a bill, very simply, about second chances. I think every single one of us believes in second chances. I've had second chances. I'll bet every one of you has had a second chance. But there are just some things in life and in this world that don't deserve a second chance. Some of you folks in here are very young. You have young children. Some of us are grandparents. I have a 6-year-old grandson. So take the courts, take the law, take that all out of this. If the guy 2 doors down from me has a swimming pool, and I know that he has been a first or a second-degree sexual perpetrator, do you think for 1 minute I'm going to allow my 6-year-old grandson to go to that guy's pool? What kind of an idiot would I have to be? What kind of a stupid fossil of a grandmother if my son ever found out I sent his son to the guy's pool? Think about that. You need a babysitter. Oh, that babysitter, first degree, second degree sexual assault. But he's trying to do better. You're going to let him babysit your kids and your grandkids? Oh, I doubt it. I doubt it. Second chances, we've decriminalized parts. You get a speeding ticket, you don't go to jail. You get a DUI, you don't go to jail. But there are just some things in society that don't deserve second chances. I'm sorry. And Leader Chippendale, you said a mouthful. Yeah, we are doing society a favor. We're protecting these creeps. Yeah, they're creeps. From doing harm to the rest of us, to our children, to our grandchildren. And those that have been in the classroom, Mary, I'll bet you have, Bill, I'll bet you have, I know I have seen children who are, Nathan? Yeah, who have seen children who are eternally ruined. Their lives are ruined. Their families' lives are ruined. Their parents' lives are ruined. Those kids will never be the same. Do those people that committed those crimes deserve a second chance? Sorry, they don't. There are just some things that are unforgivable. And in my humble opinion, this is unforgivable. End of story. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Lima, please, for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Recidivism is when a person commits a criminal offense, been convicted of repeating a crime, reoffending after already receiving punishment and serving a sentence. And why do I read that definition to you? Rhode Island is number 3 in the country for the highest recidivism rate. We're at 50%. The range is 21 to 61%. The United States has some of the highest recidivism rates in the world. I'm hearing on this floor mandatory sentences don't work, but the facts do not bear that out, and I'll tell you why. Since we've got these liberal prosecutors across the world, across the country, who are letting people, criminals out with a slap on the hand, not charging violent felonies as a felony, but as a misdemeanor. People know they're not going to jail. They do smash and grabs in the middle of daylight, run in stores, beat up the people behind the counter, take whatever they want, throw people in front of subways. They're charged with a misdemeanor. Are you serious? The facts do not bear out that if we don't get tough on crime, this is what is happening. We need to swing that pendulum back And we need to say, violent criminal, you are going to be punished. That will be a deterrent. We will not be number 3 in the country for the highest recidivism rate. Rhode Island, number 3. Ridiculous. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. They go to court. A violent crime, a victim is now serving a life sentence. Life sentence a victim gets. Their family's affected, work's affected, businesses in the neighborhood are affected. And I don't know what happens with deals and plea bargains and suspended sentences, but violent criminals are not going to jail. We've seen this here, right here in this case. We need to put the violent criminals in jail. I'd like to see more mandatory sentencing. But in this case, these type of crimes, these people are not going to stop. They can't even be rehabilitated. If they could be rehabilitated, say, okay, maybe let's look at that. Maybe if we can make somebody better, we'll have compassion. These people can't. This is the only violent crime where we have these perpetrators. We have to register them. Why do we have to register them? Because we know they're going to commit the crime again. We're going to put a first-degree child molester next door to you, or you, or you? No, we notify you. I get calls from the police. Violent predator, first-degree child molester just moved 3/10 of a mile away. So you can hold on to your children tighter so a perpetrator doesn't go out and molest a little girl or a little boy. That's why we notify people in these special types of crimes. Let's swing that pendulum back. Let's hold the perpetrator accountable. Let's show the victims, don't be afraid or embarrassed to come forward and watch a perpetrator walk out of court with a slap on their hand. No, we're going to give the court system the tools to lock up that person. We want to protect the people. Come forward. A lot of people who are molested do not come forward. That number is very high. And we know why. Why should I go to court, tell my story, be embarrassed, be shamed, when that person's going to walk out of the courtroom free? Let's send the message today, Mr. Speaker. Please support this bill. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Chairman Solomon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I know there's been a lot of passionate debate on this bill, and I thank Representative Roberts for bringing this forward. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to discuss, some of the elements regarding this bill. We all know what first-degree sexual assault is. It's terrible, should be punished to the highest. But one thing that hasn't really been brought up as to what second-degree sexual assault is, how it's defined in the law. So just to bring to your attention, 1137-4, second-degree sexual assault. A person is guilty of a second-degree sexual assault if he or she engages in sexual contact with another person and if any of the following circumstances exist. The accused knows or has reason to know that the victim is mentally incapacitated, mentally disabled, or physically helpless. 2, the accused uses force, element of surprise, or coercion. 3, the accused engages in the medical treatment or examination of the victim for the purpose of sexual arousal, gratification, or stimulation. So if you're curious what sexual contact means, that means the intentional touching of the victim's or accused intimate parts, clothed or unclothed, if that intentional touching can be reasonably construed as intended by the accused to be for the purposes of sexual arousal, gratification, or assault. So if a jury finds those elements exist in this case, they have to find the defendant guilty. And with that, this bill would eliminate that discretion for the judge, and they would automatically be sentenced to 5 years in jail. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's one of these things that hadn't been discussed. And also want to remind this body that we had also passed a bill this year that would eliminate the statute of limitations for second-degree sexual assault. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Last light, you'll go right back to where we began. Chairman Craven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was brought to my attention that an audit from the Department of Corrections came back that there is zero impact of this bill on the prison, both financially and/or with reference to prison population. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And with that, there are no other lights. Clerk, please unlock the machine. All those in favor, please vote green. Any in the negative, please vote red. All members, Representative Diaz, please vote. Clerk, please lock the machine. There are 52 votes in the affirmative, 50 in the negative. The act prevails. Next